Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 65. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier on in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at bjourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at networknerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. We are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, Nick. Hey, we're back with part 2 of our discussion with Mike Burkhart and his navigation of employment upheaval. Before we get to that, though, I do have to ask, what is the story with the cover art that we're putting out this week?
Oh, are you talking about that really fantastic drawing of Mike Burkhart that somebody made?
Yes, that is what I meant.
So fun story about that. Mike and I were actually in the same corporate orientation class for VMware back in 2018. I hadn't met him in person, but I knew who he was. So I went over and introduced myself to him, told him that Nigel Hickey told me that I should meet him. He was like, well, any friend of Nigel's is a friend of mine. And so I struck up a conversation with him, and we ended up being partners in this exercise. I don't remember what the purpose of the exercise was, but we did have to draw a bust of our partner. And so that's what I drew. That was my portrait of Mike Burkhart. And I stand behind it.
And it survived until 2020. Nice.
Yeah, I was saving it for this very episode.
Well, speaking of the episode, I think we heard last week about the upheaval that Mike faced in his position and how he had, a specific amount of time to find either an internal or an external new position. And then he talked about how he'd handled those kinds of searches in the past and how he ran his search this time around, his emphasis on social media and networking as well. So I think we're going to pick up with the interview process. I think that's the part of the story that we're getting to here. So let's get to the interview with Mike Burkhart.
But I was going to ask, when you had the conversation with someone about your current position, did you have that conversation before they had Mike Burkhart's resume in hand, kind of like a first interview inside track because of the personal connections?
Good question. How did that go down? I want to say, I really, honestly, it was like, months ago now. So I'm trying to think of how that process worked. I think I did have a conversation where I reached out because I knew him too. And so reached out on LinkedIn and kind of said, hey, buddy's telling me to hit you up and, talk about this. What about this? And so I think I had an initial conversation that was, hey, here's what this looks like, da-da-da. If you're interested, great. If you're not, great. No harm, no foul either way. But I do want to speak to that. I know I'm kind of like a dog chasing a rabbit around here, so I apologize, but I do want to speak to that that connection. So with respect to looking for a position this time around, and this is one of the first times I've done this, is I looked really hard at culture. Now, culture fit is, we talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure a lot of people really look for that in their jobs. For me, especially, I had asked about it before. If you ask somebody, hey, how's the demeanor? Is everybody happy? Is things good? Da da da. You're gonna get a yes, right? The response is, oh yeah, things are great. Oh, people love their jobs and they get candy every day. It's right up on the wall. Like duh. You know, they're absolutely, when you're interviewing for positions, you're going to get the rose-colored glasses. What you're not going to get is, oh, okay, well, so and so wanted to take off for paternity leave, which I'm looking at, right? I'm having a child in June or sometime around there, and well, I'm going to want some of that. So, you know, if you hear from somebody at that company, they're like, no, I got like a day, right? That may be a pretty big negative, right? Or, hey, how do job interviews go? Or not job interviews, but performance interviews. How do performance interviews go for you? And how do they operate? Are they peer reviews? Are they, do you have mentorships? What type of lateral transitions and what are your upward mobilities look like within job ranks? Blah blah blah. Ask questions that are meaningful to you, that are indicators of culture. Because if people say, well, you're going to get hired for this job and you're going to stay here for 10 years. Cool. Do you want that? And what does that indicate to you? Does that mean that your job is immediately stagnant, or do you have mobility? Right? How easy is it to take vacation? What's the process? What's the process of taking vacation is a great question, because if they say, you just send me an email, cool. But does that fly? Is that defensible, right? Like, does the manager remember that you sent an email? Do they not check their inbox? you know? So I was really looking for a strong culture fit with respect to a team that was highly supportive and very future thinking, like future forward in a way that was palpable. And I realized that in architecture, so another interesting statistic. So out of the Fortune 500, maybe about 40%, maybe a little bit less, actually practice enterprise architecture as a discipline. So what that means is that if you were an architect and you were going into a business as a vendor, as a partner, and you're going into a customer, you have a less than a 50-50 shot at them understanding what you even do. So your first line of defense is going to be, this is what architecture does. This is what it's going to do for your company. And this is why it's valuable. Now, what I have seen that translate into in my personal career, other people may have different experiences, but as an architect for 10 years, I have seen a lot of things escalate to politics and nepotism. And what I mean by that is people like people they've worked with before, and people like the stuff that they don't have to work so hard at. So when you're talking about changing a business as an architect and you're like, oh, we'll introduce a whole new line of business, it'd be great. New products, new services. Oh, amazing. As an architect from the outside, there's a lot of opportunity to help somebody out and it's going to make everybody happy. But from the inside, someone's going to say, well, my cousin works for vendor B, so we're going to go with them. And I don't care about business requirements because he works for vendor B. So we're going with them. And then, enter the gunfight between some VP and some director and all sorts. So it's a lot of back and forth. Right. So another reason that I transitioned out of architecture was the political battles, and there are people that really, like, they just do very well in that space. At this time in my life, I do not navigate politics well. I just don't. I'm a very good people person until it gets into, I know that guy's going with vendor B because his cousin works there. And then I'm like, that doesn't meet your requirements. And they're like, well, we don't care, get out. And then that looks bad on me because my company obviously wasn't chosen. And then, so
you need better cousins,
right? I need cousins. But so anyway, so you look for things that, like I said before, like look for how you want your life to look like. Do you want to be working 60, 80 hours a week, or do you want to work 40? Do you want your life to look like you're traveling on the road a lot and you're making overnight stays and flying across the country? Cool. Do you want your life to look like you're speaking at conferences regularly? Or do you want to just sit at home and code? Do you want to build data architectures? Do you want to try to break stuff in a security team? Do what does your life look like? What are you doing that is you at your happiest? And then translate that into what current skills you have and what type of, what kind of work you can do. Because like you said before, many different skills can translate into lots of different job roles. It just depends on what you want to do, and how you want your life to work for you.
Sometimes it's those simple questions that people ask you that you can't always answer immediately. Like, what do you enjoy most about your job? To answer that on the spot is actually a pretty complicated thing, I've found.
Yeah. And it's more, the problem is the answer to that question is more about where you are, and it's not about where you're going. What do you like most about your job? I have it. It pays me money. I have coworkers that I like. I've got a desk. I've got a corner office with a window. That's nice. Like I like my customers. I like the routines that I go through. All these answers end up being like, well, you might as well keep your job. Don't ask these questions when you want to change jobs. So it's true that question it's a hard one to answer on the spot, and it's a weird one to ask about. Is your future job the one you're in, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, but I actually had a recruiter ask me, I see you're not interested in changing. That's a status that you have set in LinkedIn. But if you did have to change, like, what would be the things that you would need from a new company? And I was like, oh, that you know, my immediate reaction is like, that's a great sales technique. Maybe I need to use that more often. I understand that you're going with my competitor, but if you had to think of three things that would keep you from doing that, what would they be? It's tough to hear a question without thinking about the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a question of like, how good is the person at controlling, saying the answers. But yeah, that it's those tough questions that. And then, it's also the discipline of actually doing the work to try to answer them and answer them in a way that, actually can help you in your current journey, right? Whatever that is, good or bad.
Mm-hmm. And that's true. To add to that, a lot of my journey this time around was finding the right questions to ask. And I've even had a couple of people reach out to me, and there's a guy I'm actively talking with that was like, well, would I be a good fit for this role? What do you think about that? I'm kind of going through the same thing that you're going through. And I was like, okay, and one of the questions was, what do you like best about your job? And I was like, yeah, you can ask a lot of questions about yourself now, but what about yourself tomorrow? Right? What about yourself in 3 years? Are you going to be happy making the choices that you made, and why? Great memory. I once had a director, or it might have been director or VP. I was at a manufacturing company in Cincinnati, and director looked at me when I was leaving. Right, I had worked at this company and I'd implemented a international ERP system, and we'd migrated off of the old system, and it took $30 million and all these and blah, 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 like all these numbers and statistics. It was just crazy. And I told him I'm gone, right? I'd worked myself to the bone. And he says, Mike, I'll tell you one thing that has always served me well. And it's go to the highest bidder. And I couldn't have laughed harder, because everything I've ever known in my life is that you will be paid for your job, and how much you're paid is whatever you're willing to accept and negotiate for, right? Like, you're allowed to say, no, I want more money. And then the employers are allowed to say, no, you can't have it. And that's fine. But going to the highest bidder is one of the most dangerous, slippery slopes I've ever seen in my life. and, and, and I talked to him many years later, and what he had told me was, I was going to double your salary. And what I told him was, I still would have left. It's just cracking me up, to remember this, and to kind of think of like, what do you value out of work? Do you value your time off? Well, of course we all do. but what do you value when you're working? Is it, oh, I'm earning the most money doing the worst work in my life? Well, congrats.
I will
So
destroy your soul. What are you willing to take for that?
I will take $1 American. Very well, two.
Yeah, we think that a job is about exchanging time for money, right? But it isn't always about that. Sometimes there's things that are more important than that, and so foundationally, getting back to what you started out with, like asking for that culture fit, like that's so important, and it's also really important to figure out how you're going to find that out, right?
Yeah.
Because most places are good when times are good. Culture, hearing about culture, sometimes that's about when you're in conflict, right? So, talking about getting time off. What is the culture of, like, what happens when you want time off and they don't want to give it to you? Or it's not at the most convenient time. What takes precedence, right? How about when you're having a conflict with a manager, or a conflict with a coworker? Like, what is the culture for working those things out? And those are difficult questions to ask and to get answered, right? So yeah, it's a maybe that's an entire series of discussions that we need to start having.
I'm
How to,
I'm totally game for that, because one of my questions was, how do you celebrate as a workforce? How
ooh,
how do you, as a either as a team or organization or a company, how do you come together and celebrate your successes? Or just the fact that you work together, right? Do you have holiday parties? Do you celebrate the birth of children? Do you, you know, do you do you do you be joyful together, and do you mourn together, right? Like, it's very important that, because like you said before, like, we're trading our lives. This is our life. It's not time. Time is the existence of you that you only have a finite quantity of on this planet. And you have no idea how long that is. That's terribly unfortunate. So so really, like, are you willing to trade your life in minutes or hours or years at a time, however much time it is? Are you willing to trade that for whatever gain that you're getting and whatever you're willing to build with another company? And that's where that passion comes in. There are a lot of people that got into IT because it makes good money and good for you, and that's a hard path to drive, because we do hard work, and a lot of the stuff that we do is uncelebrated by businesses. Going back to the, being an architect, and you walk into a business and they don't know what you do, and you say, I'm here to translate your business requirements and objectives and take your vision and make it reality. And they say, great, it sounds like you're in sales. And you say, I am. And the room stays quiet for a while. But like, you really have to realize, like, in IT especially, I mean, every field has this to a certain effect, but in IT especially, our value is not very easily quantified by business people. And if it is, they usually quantify it in hours and dollars. They don't quantify it in the amount of joy that it brings to your life. They don't quantify it in the amount of time that you get to spend with your family. They don't quantify it by the fact that you didn't get to spend the 3 weeks off for paternity leave and you got called 6 times in the first week of your son's birth. And I'm totally not bitter about that, but hypothetically speaking,
Of course, we're all friends here, Mike.
right? This is a safe zone, right? We're in the circle of trust.
It's a safe space.
Oh, it's okay. Um, but seriously, right? Like, you personally should care very much about how you spend your time, and that is elicited in your job. You're going to sleep a third of your life. You're going to work a third of your life, and then the other third is yours. So you have control over another one of those thirds. Make it happen, right? So if there's anything that I can part about that, it's a very serious decision. And yeah, you have to make money, and yeah, you have to go through the grind sometimes. But that culture fit, that, like, can I celebrate with these people? Can we, like, if I have a question, is it going to be easy to answer? Does everybody dogpile? Do we have this positive, agile sort of culture that pushes each other forward and upward, and not off a cliff, you know? So we've all seen it both ways, right? So make sure that you're going somewhere that you're comfortable with and that's going to support your goals.
This seems like the social equivalent of a systems thinking mindset to me. Imagine the person who they only learned networking or they only learned infrastructure. That's what they do day to day to day. They start to learn new things. It's hard for them to get outside the bubble. When your daily grind is full and you don't have a lot of spare time, it's hard to step outside what you're doing and think about what it could be like. That's why people don't update their resume. That's why they don't think of all these questions that you just mentioned that I even thought, oh, wow, I never thought to ask that about how how a company celebrates its success. That's fantastic stuff. Again, part of that exposure to thinking outside yourself and taking time for it. That's another challenge.
Yeah, it's totally true, Nick. I mean, you know, especially if you're, looking for a new job or you've lost your job, it's like, oh, I have this like, job shaped hole in my life. I'm looking to replace it, plus a little bit more. Right. That's what we're, instead of like, no, like, I know what's, you know, you know, maybe I've lost something, but maybe, some of the things that I lost, like I didn't really lose. Like, I'm not really missing that part of it. And maybe the hole that's left in my life is anyway, Nick, yeah, what you're saying, like great stuff. And Mike, like what you're saying about like the, looking for the cultural fit, I think is, you know, critical and key, and anything that we can do to have like a continuing conversation, maybe to help people like figure out how it is that they're gonna like get this information about companies that they're investigating and thinking about working. We should make that an ongoing conversation, and maybe like the thing that we should talk a little bit more about is how we can get people to examine that before they are in crisis mode, right? So they are comfortable in their jobs, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but what's going to make them even more uncomfortable is thinking about whether or not, like, the position they're in is actually stable and whether or not they're actually comfortable, right? So, looking for that cultural fit, looking for what it is that they're actually interested in doing and what they want their future to look like. How do we get started in that conversation, when we are, I don't know, semi comfortable, maybe there's kind of a looming feeling of dread or, am I in a dead end position? Am I growing enough? Anyway, this is a really long question, but I think that's kind of, where we should, um, look at. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think it's a great avenue to explore, really to kind of start with. So I want to level set with the idea that comfortable isn't complacent, right? Being comfortable and being nurtured in a position is always a positive outcome. Unless that's not what you want, right? If you do not want to grow in that direction, that can be a negative, right? Where your boss is like, "Oh, I'll support you with training classes and give you extra time to work on these things that you're great at," and da da da. And meanwhile, you're like, "I hate this." I think give it enough time, and any point in your career, you'll experience that, and you're like, "Yes, I'm great at things that I do not like." So awesome. There's an ERP system, going back to the previous conversation. There's an ERP system I'm really good at that I'm not listing on my resume. So, but to that point, so understanding what your goals are is a tough thing, because it requires self-reflection, and psychologically speaking, we don't normally think of ourselves as a person in our own lives. Right? We think from the standpoint of narrator, but we don't think from the standpoint of first person. So, which is great until you are faced with these pseudo existential, moments in your life where you're like, what is it all for? What am I working towards? Well, what's the value of my time, and where should I place this? Who is the benefactor of the fruits of my labor? Whatever. So the advice I can give on those points, having had a lot of time to think about them, is, number one, if you're thinking about a job change, if you're thinking about changing roles, not even just, I did a bit of a pivot, but if you're thinking about going somewhere else as a job, examine the idea, if you can, that, is it the employer that I don't like working for? Is it the job I don't like doing? Because, your culture can be a thing. Your daily work can be unfulfilling. Maybe you're burnt out, right? There's plenty, and I will be the first one to mention this transition is the first time I've felt real joy out of my job in almost 10 years. I kid you not. I have been working for the past 20, and I have been probably very unhappy and stressed out because I've just been, I'm pursuing things, I'm moving forward, I'm doing my passion, and really what it turns out is I'm running myself ragged. I haven't stopped to think of what the toll is on all of my efforts. So you really have to think about what makes me think I don't want to do this job anymore, because that's a negative, right? If you start from the position of negative, you should probably try to fix what's not good. And if leaving is your solution to that, that really just gets rid of the problem. That pattern can repeat itself in future positions. You can maintain your unhappiness or dissatisfaction while still working for many employers. So I've done it. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't leave jobs because I was unhappy. I left jobs for many different reasons. But eventually the point comes out where, I was still unhappy, and moving jobs didn't fix that either.
It's a pattern that appears in a bunch of different places. Like, I'm sure we've all known people who have had a series of bad relationships that were bad in very similar ways.
Serial daters. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, wait, how did you end up in a relationship again with someone who's like, you're unhappy with the relationship in the exact same way that you're unhappy in the last relationship? Why didn't you fix that? I mean, obviously it's so easy to criticize somebody from the outside, but like, the exact same thing can happen in job and career, right? You didn't like this about, a position, and you're in a new position and you don't like the exact same thing, or something very closely related. And unless you're doing the work, as you said, to really analyze what it is that you want, right? Not just the things that you don't like, but the things that you actively, positively want in your life, that you want added in, not just subtracted, but added, then, it's so easy to repeat those patterns. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. It's just, a point I thought was worth underlining.
No, that's terribly poignant. And it brings up a thought, my mother is a very close friend of mine, an advocate. And, one of those things that I was told years ago was, you accept the love you believe you deserve. That is a very powerful statement. Now, we talked about love earlier, and, translate that however you will. We can flip that into a different conversation light and say, we accept the successes we believe we merit. So we understand we can accomplish certain things. We celebrate, we are joyful in our lives, and we heartfelt accept the positivity that we generate in our lives. That is a positive line of thinking. That is your goal in your everyday life, not just work. And when you are looking at transitioning, it's my strong belief that you want to find something you're moving towards and not away from. And to accept the fact that you're unhappy is hard. To really do the soul searching and say, okay, great, this is rock bottom, right? This is not good. Because no one wants to think that. We don't want to think that things are bad. We naturally want to think that things are good. And people will drink themselves and other things themselves into thinking that things are good, but that's not, these are not the routes to happiness, right? So when you assess your situation, you need to positively outline the things you want to move towards. Accept the love you believe you deserve. And if you don't believe that, you need to address that which is not whole within yourself. If your job does not fulfill you, congratulations, it's just a job. Find the work that does and be tenacious about it. Saying no is better for you than saying yes to anything. Find the yes that you want, and the rest will come. That's my belief anyway.
Heck yeah. I don't know. Nick, 2 mic drop moments in a single podcast? I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty good stuff. It's tough to follow that, Mike. But that's
Did
good.
I tell you
man.
I like public speaking?
I think I heard that earlier.
I'm also a very passionate person.
It's good though, but the idea of fixing yourself, really getting to the root of the problem, because we don't always want to accept that the problem is actually us and not other people or a situation. So, yeah, that's a hard one to swallow. Just like you said, you have to put your pride aside, which is really tough, and be a little humble.
Yeah, and also maybe the idea that you don't need to wait for yourself to be fixed, right? It's like just incremental improvement, right? Just improve. Am I on a track for improvement? Okay, great. Once I'm confident about my trajectory of improvement, maybe that's the time. I don't need to, the journey is the important thing, not the destination, right? So
one thing I'll add to that too, that I have not, probably I think I have had in some point in my career, but I have not had recently, pursue a relationship with a mentor. And by that, I mean, find someone who you believe you can trust, or that you can have a working relationship with as the very least. And understand that, what you're looking for out of a mentor is going to be someone who's going to help you grow, professionally, personally. They're going to help you reflect, and they're going to, hold up a mirror to you and hold you accountable for your goals and your desires. And it's really amazing, to me, because I did that during my period of self-reflection, is, what do you want? What do you want to do? Who do you want to be? What is the outcome of all of this? Right. And where does that lead you? And, being able to do that with someone who is not yourself is probably a lot easier. Because I think it was Freud or Nietzsche who said, only bipolar people can self-reflect accurately. And I was like, well, that's either very severe or very true. I'm not sure which, but but getting back to the point, if you are looking for some progress in your life, if you're looking for kind of the push, finding someone who has been there and who has walked the path and who can help you on that journey is hugely powerful. It is immensely useful and again, understand that you're going to have to provide value back to them, whether it's progress on your goals, or it's, providing new information to them, or it's showing off that they're a good mentor and that you're a great mentee. Hey, I took this person on as a mentee and they've accomplished these goals and we've removed these roadblocks and we've really, in the past 6 months, year, 18 months, really hit the bricks running. Whereas before they felt stagnant, unsuccessful, unfulfilled. That's what a mentor wants. They want to be able to say, I have provided value and input in your life that is immensely measurable and immeasurable. And if you find a mentor like that, keep them and tell me who they are and if they have cousins or whatever. No, in all reality, again, find someone who can help you along that journey, and find people that you respect that can help you reflect.
Yeah. And what better place to look for a mentor than the John White School of Mentoring? I feel like you teed that one up for us, Mike. Send that tweet out to @Nerd Journey today for pricing and packaging.
I'll only take 10%. Just a little finder's fee.
There you go.
Oh,
We can work that out offline.
I know it's a great point, right? But just the idea that we need external coaching is, critical and key. And I'll shout out, a book here that I've read, which is The Talent Code. And one of the things that that the author points to in that book is the need for coaching, like excellence. If you want to achieve excellence, that requires coaching. It requires like really deliberate practice. It requires that you have some kind of fire and ignition that's going to sustain you through the time that it takes to do all the practice that you need to become truly excellent. But it also requires feedback from an external third party, aka coaching or mentorship. So excellent point. Man, guys, like I can't believe that we've had this great conversation. We started 2 hours after we were supposed to start, due to a series of unfortunate circumstances, which we've alluded to and hinted at throughout the episode. But I feel like we got to a really terrific place and had an amazing conversation here.
Yeah, it's been great. Hey, Mike, if people want to follow up with you and ask additional questions on what we've discussed here, or just have you be their mentor, assuming we get a cut of that,
10%.
where can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am interested in helping people along, whether it be just conversationally or if someone would like to be a mentee of mine, by all means. You can reach me at vmikeb on Twitter. Also find me on LinkedIn. I'm Mike Burkhart. However that URL goes is linkedin.com/something/Mike Burkhart.
We'll have links in the show notes.
Okay, great. But whenever we find out what that one is, put that there too. Also, so again, I mean, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so that'd be probably the best place to find me. And then, we can exchange email and whatnot and go from there. But again, if I can impart anything on anyone, it's, like I said, build your network. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to take a small chance that might change your life immensely. I recently read someone who is a CISO at CISO, information security officer, chief, on Twitter. That was, I attended a master class that was small in Seattle, and I didn't want to attend it in the first place, but I did. And out of that came a series of events that I didn't want to do, but I did those too. And then eventually I found myself the chief information security officer of a very large multinational corporation, and a very successful woman at that. So if it's anything that I can impart to you, it's do the hard thing, do what you might not want to do, and you would be surprised at the results that you can gain from just some simple, small actions of reaching out.
Come on, Mike. 3 mic drop moments.
Don't make me go for 4.
Okay.
I'll do it.
One of those was borrowed. So
recycle.
Okay.
Boom. 4.
And Mike Burkhart for the hat trick. And that's how we do it here on Nerd Journey, ladies and gentlemen.
I really hope we edit those ones out, but if we don't, I understand.
Well, I'll talk to the editor. We'll see what it can do.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll definitely have you on again when we can all think of something else to talk about.
Thanks very much, Mike.
The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much, John and Nick, for having me. It's been a great time and a great journey discussing this with you, and I look forward to other future episodes with you guys. Thanks again.
Sounds great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Take it easy.
You too.
There certainly were a lot of mic drop moments in that last bit, John. I'm floored by how many we had. But I really liked what he said about finding out if the reasons you want to leave an employer are because of the job or the employer. If I leave to go do the same job somewhere else, it may actually be that deep down, I don't like doing that job in some way. So we need to take time to do that self-analysis. And am I really on track to improve myself consistently as I go throughout my career?
Yeah, I really like that. Very insightful. And, maybe the additional thing that he said about, are you moving towards something or are you moving away from something, reacting against something? And I think it's just really too easy in our lives to react against something. Oh, I didn't like this, so I'm going to define everything I do as a reaction against that, instead of, instead defining what it is that we're doing as, moving towards positivity. Right. So that's always better, I think, and more satisfying, hopefully. Anything else before we get out of here?
I really liked some of the questions Mike brought up that he asked about to find out company culture fit. There were a lot of questions he brought up that I just thought about for a second. Well, I never thought to ask that. And I think it's just another example of how we can get our minds thinking in that way as we go throughout the interview process.
Yeah. How does the company celebrate successes was one, very interesting, and also revealing about company culture.
Yes, sir. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
All right. Farewell, listeners, and tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_. Signing off.
Adios. If anybody out there wants a portrait like Mike Burkhart got, it's going to take some time, but I might be able to do it for you if the price is right.
All right. The Nick Cordy Portraiture Gallery, open for business. Adios, everybody.
Just gonna do it live.
Say narwhal. It'll be fine.
My safe word is narwhal.
And stinger.
Okay. Breathe
All
heavy.
right. Everybody's going to be okay.